Here's a number nobody puts on their highlight reel. Not the deal size, not the brand fee, not the number of zeros on the invoice everybody screenshots and posts, half covered like it's modest. The number nobody shows you is what's left after tax, after splits, after the lifestyle that grew to match the income, after the emergency that always seems to show up right when the money does. Because here's the thing about creative income, it's loud on the way in and silent on the way out. Everybody hears about the check, almost nobody hears about the leak. Now, I've sat with creatives who on paper had the best year of their career. Bigger deals, bigger fees, their name finally moving in the rooms that matter. And the same person, 12 months later, in worse financial shape than when they started. Not because the money didn't come, it came. It just didn't stay. Now today, we're not talking about how to earn more. We're talking about why earning more on its own has never made anybody rich. Welcome back to the Vibe Lab podcast, where we sit inside the machinery of the African creative economy instead of just admiring it from the outside. I'm your host, FemiKnows, and this month, as always, we're syncing with Build Lab Course 1, our 13-week critical program. This week's Build Lab topic is money, specifically the difference between revenue and retention. So that's what we're doing today. No guests this week, just me and the numbers I've watched move or not move behind a lot of good years. I've spent enough time reading creative contracts and more quietly their financial situation to have a pretty clear picture of how this actually plays out. Not the version people post, the version that shows up when the applause dies down and someone has to explain where the money went. 3 questions today, so let's get into the first one. What's the difference between the money that comes in and the money that stays? Now, I think most creatives, especially early on, only carry one column in their head. Money in. That's it. That's the old spreadsheet. Nobody taught them there's a second column. Money that survives contact with their actual life. And the second column is the only one that compounds into anything. Revenue is a single transaction. It answers one question. Did the work sell? Retention is a different question entirely. Did the work make you wealthier? And those two numbers can move in completely opposite directions in the same year. Now, I've seen creatives have their biggest earning year ever and their net worth barely move. Sometimes it even shrinks because every naira that came in had already been spent or promised or quietly absorbed into a lifestyle that expanded right alongside the income. Now, here's the part that trips people up. Revenue feels like progress because it's visible. It's the alert on your phone, the number in the account, the deal you can talk about. Now, retention, on the other hand, is invisible by comparison. Nobody throws a party because they kept 40% of what they earned instead of 25%. There's no applause for that. But that quiet, unglamorous number is the one that actually determines whether you're building something or just running very fast on the same spot. So when I ask where the money ends up, I don't mean where it starts. Everybody knows where it starts. I mean, what's still standing 6 months later, after tax, after fees, after the lifestyle that quietly grew to match the income. That's the only number that actually tells you anything about your trajectory. And most creatives, if you ask them right now what percentage of this year's revenue they've actually retained, they couldn't tell you. Not because they're careless people, because nobody ever framed it as a number worth tracking in the first place. Now, the second question. What is a leak most creatives don't see until it costs them years? Not months, years. Because that's usually the real timeline. The leak doesn't announce itself. It's not a single bad decision, a bad deal, a scam, theft. Do those happen too, yeah? But far more often, it's a slow, invisible tax on every good year that quietly cancels itself out. And it's boring, which is exactly why nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to make content about, I didn't separate my account for 4 years. It won't trend. It doesn't trend. But it's the single most common pattern I see. Let me walk through what that actually looks like, because I think naming it specifically matters more than describing it generally. The first leak is no separation between personal and business money. Everything sits in one account. The fee comes in, rent comes out of the same pool, equipment comes out of the same pool, a night out comes out of the same pool, which simply means there's no way to actually see what the work is generating versus what life is consuming. Work with me. You can't manage what you can't see. And most creatives can't see this because it was never separate or separated to begin with. The second leak is no tax structure until it's too late. Tax feels like a future problem, right up until it's an urgent one, and by then, penalties eat gains that took years to build. So I've watched a strong earning year get partially erased by a tax bill that could have been planned for gradually, quietly in the background, instead of absorbed as a single painful shock. Now, the third leak is treating every good month as a new baseline instead of the exception. A big deal lands and spending rises to meet it almost immediately. Not because of one reckless purchase, but because the lifestyle recalibrates. The car, the apartment, the standing at the restaurants, all quiet reset to the new number. And then the next month isn't as good, but the spending doesn't know that yet. The fourth leak, and I think this one is the most expensive of all, is having no ownership vehicle, no structure through which income becomes an asset, which means the money just sits as personal cash flow. It never becomes equity, property, a stake in something that keeps producing value after you stop actively working. It passes through your hands and poof, it's gone. And there's nothing standing that represents the years you've put in. None of that is one bad choice you can point to and say, that's where it went wrong. It's a habit repeated quietly for years that nobody flagged as habit because each individual month looked fine. It's only when you zoom out to 5 years that the pattern becomes impossible to miss. And by then, the cost is not money. It's years, the years you could have spent building something that outlasted that particular deal. Whew. Now, question 3. How did I personally shift from earning to keeping? What actually changed? Now, I won't sugarcoat it. The real shift wasn't a single dramatic moment, a crisis, a wake-up call, like in the movie sense. It was slower and less cinematic than that, trust me. It was noticing that I kept asking myself, what did I make this year? And never once asking, what do I own now that I didn't own last year? These are completely different questions. Let me say that again. What did I make this year? That was what I was asking. I never once asked, what do I own now that I didn't own last year? The first one is easy to answer and feels good. The second one is harder to answer. And for a long time, my honest answer would have been not much relative to what I'd earned. What changed practically was building a retention system before I tried to scale earning any further. Not after, before. It's tempting to think I'll fix the structure once the money gets bigger, but that's backwards, trust me. The structure is what determines whether bigger money actually changes anything. So the sequence I'd recommend, and the one I eventually followed myself, is get the plumbing right first, then let more water flow through it. Concretely, that means that meant a proper structure, a percentage set aside automatically before it even reached a spendable account. Not a mental note to save what's left at the end of the month, because there's rarely anything left at the end of the month when the account isn't structured that way. The money has to be diverted before it ever has the chance to feel like this is mine to spend. Because once it lands in a spendable account, oh my God, psychologically, it's already spoken for. And then, just as important, treating that structure as non-negotiable. The same way rent or upkeep is non-negotiable. Not something to get to once things settle down. Because things don't settle down on their own, it's there's no future month where it magically becomes easier to start saving. You have to build the settling in deliberately now with whatever income you have today, not the income you're hoping for next year. If there's one practical starting point for anyone listening with none of this in place yet, it's this. Get real support around your money before you scale further. Someone who actually understands that creative economy is lumpy and irregular, not a predictable monthly salary, because most standard financial advice assumes a salary that doesn't apply to us as creatives. Separate your personal and business money immediately, even before it feels necessary, even if the amounts are still small, because the habit matters more than the amounts at first. And understand your tax position before the money arrives, not after. So it's a planned deduction instead of a surprise bill. None of that is dramatic. It's boring, it's small, repeated, and that's exactly why it works. The creative economy rewards people who can sustain unglamorous habits over years far more than it rewards a single clever move. So now, let me leave you with this. Let's land the plane as usual. Revenue without retention is a treadmill. You can run faster, you can take bigger deals, you can chase bigger checks, and still end most years standing exactly where you started, because the money was never built to stay. It arrived, it circulated, and it left. And a year later, you have stories about it, but not much else. The structural damage, the structural changes, the tax setup, the ownership vehicles, retention systems shift the economics of a creative career more than earning more ever does. Not instead of earning more. Underneath it, holding it up, structure is what decides whether a good year actually changes your life or just passes through it on its way to somewhere else. Structure is what decides whether a good year actually changes your life or just passes through it on its way to somewhere else. And I want to be clear about what this isn't. This isn't a case for earning less or being cautious to the point of stalling. It's a case for making sure that when the bigger year finally comes, and for a lot of you listening, it definitely will, there's actually somewhere for that money to land and stay, instead of a system that was never built to hold it. I hope you enjoyed today's session. One thing to hold from today: don't ask how much you made this year. Ask how much of it is still yours, and in what form. Is it cash, assets, ownership, structure? That answer tells you more about your trajectory than any invoice ever will. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Vibe Lab podcast. Next week on the Vibe Lab, we'll go from keeping the money to knowing what you're actually entitled to. Episode 4 is the rights you don't know you have. A look at the rights creatives already hold and rarely use. This has been the Vibe Lab. I'm FemiKnows. Go check what's actually staying. Don't forget to follow Critical on all social media platforms. I'll see you next week. Thank you and have a blessed day.